So I wanted to break down how I made this RC car render that I created for Pwnisher's Endless Engines 3D challenge. It took about 40 hours of work across 4 weeks to make, and 3 hours of rendering total. My original idea when I heard the prompt was to create a kid playing with a Lego car on a desk, and had created a test render with a Speed Champions Lego Countach, which is one of my favorite sets. But while watching Pwnisher's first live stream explaining the challenge and rules, he said that he may take an original model into account when judging for the top 5 entries. Okay. So what could I make that would be an original model, but also not stupidly difficult to do? Well, as a kid, my dad was really into RC cars, and at the time wanted to own one called the Tamiya Hornet. Later in life, he eventually bought one that we built and drove around, which was a great memory. There was my render. So I compiled a bunch of references and got to work. I initially blocked out the basic shape of the car just to get the proportions right immediately out of the gate. The chassis and shell of the car are very geometric, so this was pretty straightforward. Afterwards, I got the background blocked out. My idea was an RC car race at a local park, so I included a tape-looking fence thing and a crowd of people. I also wanted to isolate 2 people as sort of the main stars of the render, aside from the actual car. The ground was done by just subdividing a plane many times and using the sculpting tool to get some bumps to better emulate a dirt path. I then set up the car rig using a free plugin called RigACar by digiCreatures. It was pretty easy to set up, and while not as advanced as a paid car rig, it worked perfectly for me. It even comes with auto ground detection, which is great for having the suspension automatically react to a bumpy path. I wanted to get the animation out of the way as early as possible, so I could see how much detail I needed to go into when modeling the car. The most important thing here was showing off the weight of the car. Since it's essentially plastic and a small amount of metal, it needed to bounce around and be affected more by the ground than a full-size car, which is why it snaps into place quicker when connecting with the ground and stays in the air a bit longer when jumping. At this point, I felt pretty good with the animation and had moved on to modeling the car. Since the shape of the car followed the block out pretty closely, there wasn't a ton of additional work needed to be done to the main shape, primarily just getting the windows of the shell and cutouts of the chassis correct. The tricky bit came when modeling and later rigging the smaller bits, like the rear and front shocks and rods that control the steering. I don't remember what they're called. These smaller bits were all custom rigged, and I'm actually pretty happy with it since it's the first time I've ever worked with constraints. The only tutorial I followed for any of this was for the shocks, which I got here. And after copying over the base animation to the new rig and making some small adjustments to avoid clipping, I had this. Once I saw the playback, I turned into Ron Swanson playing a deer hunting video game. I couldn't believe that I had made something that looked good, that felt good. Even without any texturing or finishing the background, I would have been thrilled to show this off. But I still had 3 weeks left and a ton of work to do. The next step was texturing, of which a majority of them were from Poliigon. The stickers were made using the actual sticker sheet that comes with the real model's kit, and I had to go through the manual to see which stickers I should put where, just to get the main stripes correct. This was probably more tedious than just using proper UV unwrapping and painting them on by hand, but hey, it was good practice to get more familiar with Affinity Photo. I even created some custom retro race looking stickers to give the whole thing a more personal touch. To get the look of the stickers wearing off, I used Ian Hubert's lazy tutorial for worn stickers. Next step was the background. I grew up in Northeast Ohio and we have a beautiful parks network, so that was the look I was going for. For the ground, I used another texture from Poliigon, and without any movement, it didn't look great. But actually rendering the video with motion blur hid the issues pretty well. As for the trees and grass, I purchased the Botaniq Trees and Grass library, not the full version. Dear God, that's pricey. I originally just wanted trees, but seeing that the library included grass, twigs, and rocks, I felt it was a great investment. All the assets look incredible and come with a ton of features that I didn't end up using but are awesome for customization. The trees were hand placed while the grass was set up using geometry nodes. It was at this point where performance became an issue and my viewport really started chugging. The trees especially have a lot of mesh to work with and caused a lot of slowdown. I got around this by rendering an image of 2 separate trees, and used them as textures on planes in the background to create the illusion of patches of forest. I then used a small numbers of actual tree models in front of them to get some more depth and catch the light of the sun. In Blender's real-time renderer Eevee, it looks pretty jank, but it looks great in cycles. Even with the tree issues fixed, there was still a ton of lag between their models as well as the grass. So using geometry nodes, specifically this tutorial, I was able to reduce the geometry processed in the viewport, which improved everything significantly. It was still slow, but back to a usable state. All the lighting was provided from an HDRI from Polyhaven, but when I was rendering an Eevee, I used an additional sun lamp to add a shadow under the car. The final major step was getting the background filled with people. At this point, I had 2 weeks left and was about to leave for a trip, so I had to scale back. Instead of a crowd of people watching a race, there'd be a father and a son driving the car together. Personally, I like this more. It shows off the little things in life that lead to happy memories. Since the characters would be blurry in the background, I didn't need the topology to be good or the UVs to be right. As long as the proportions were correct and the animation looked good, everything would look perfect. Well, I did one of those things right. Can you believe this was done with a mocap suit? I know, it's so realistic. The last step was making the background feel a bit more filled in and reduce a sense of separation between the foreground and the background. So I added an admittedly very jank gazebo and some additional trees placed here and there. After 5 hours of failed render attempt and some post-processing, here's what I had. I honestly cannot believe I made this. I don't really like stuff that looks photoreal and have little experience with backgrounds and hard surface modeling. So the fact that this looks good is mind-blowing to me. A year ago, if you showed me this and said I made it, I probably wouldn't believe you. There's a lot I learned throughout the entire project, especially in the rigging and optimization departments. Will I attempt the next pwnisher challenge? Who knows, but I am really glad I did this time.